Hello and welcome back to another update. It is your host KUPYANSK, and in this one the Russians have started the first stage of their summer offensive, storming the city of Pokrovsk and the town of Kupiansk. The Russians have made significant advances since yesterday with a storming directly head-on of the city of Pokrovsk as well as the northern parts of Kupiansk. The Russians have managed to gain a foothold within the southern parts of the city of Pokrovsk and have managed to infiltrate the city itself. The Russians have managed to capture fortified possessions to the south of the city, the town of Novoekonomichne, the town of Zverove, and entered into the southern parts of the city and to the outskirts of Troyanda, bypassing the remaining parts of Leontovichi. Through this road in between the reservoir to the west and the city itself to the east, the Russians infiltrated deep into the city, passing through the first patch area in the southern parts and moving into the central parts and even the northern parts of the city. Russian soldiers drove through the city in different directions, fighting over different areas, before the Ukrainian forces were able to reorganize themselves. The Russians managed to cut off some of the roads and put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainian positions. According to Deep State Map, they have already cleared all of the Russian forces within the city. However, I'm waiting for confirmation as to whether they will be able to entrench themselves and establish a supply line, or if the Ukrainians have cleared the city completely. In either case, the Russians have started the storming of the city, fighting over the southern district of the city and fighting over the settlements leading into the city from the southern direction. The Russians have also continued offensive operations along the railway area, bypassing defensive positions and fortifications of the Ukrainians by capturing Novoekonomichne, and the fighting is also taking place in the area in between the northern flank, which is the residential area of the southern parts of Pokrovsk, and the southern flank, which is the railway area. The Russians are looking to encircle the Ukrainian forces by combining their two pincers in the southern and northern flanks, cutting off the supplies for the Ukrainian fortified positions in between the two areas, gaining control over the southern flank of Pokrovsk for continuous offensive operations into the city. The Russians also managed to cut off the highway further towards the city itself, closer towards the city, cutting off the supply lines to some of the fortified positions and trenches of the Ukrainians on the western flank of the city for an additional entry into the city through the railway area to the western parts of it. The Russians are here looking to storm the city directly now that they are threatening the supply lines to the north of the city, limiting supplies going into the city, while at the same time the Ukrainian manpower within the Pokrovsk section of the front line has run really low, as they have rotated a lot of the troops to other sectors of the front line, and they have to cover a wide front line with the Russian advances in the northern flank of the city. Now that the Russians have widened the front line significantly with the northeastern push, the Ukrainians' lines have been thinned out significantly, and this allows for the Russians to launch significant offensive operations. The Russians also launched an assault towards Novoekonomichne, gaining full control over the town except for a small part in the southern outskirts of it. The Russians managed to gain several positions within the town after heavily bombarding it with MLRS, artillery, and drones, following which they stormed the town from the northern flank where they already had entrenched themselves and through the highway to the east. Following the capture of Novohrodivka, the eastern road was completely open for their offensive operations. Since then, they have been geolocated on several points within the town, holding the Russian flag. Now the Ukrainians have withdrawn to the fortified positions and industrial area west of the town, which is the final defensive position of the Ukrainians ahead of the eastern flank of Mirnorod. The Russians have recently advanced to the south and now also to the east of Mirnorod, opening up the road for offensive operations from the southern and eastern flanks as the Russians stormed the Ukrainian positions remaining in the area. Gaining control over Pokrovsk and Mirnorod will establish a significant logistical hub for Russian forces for the second stage of their offensive, which will be to enter into the Dnipropetrovsk region and flank the fortified positions and defensive lines of the Ukrainians within the Zaporizhzhia region. Pokrovsk is essential for any large-scale operations by the Russians into the Dnipropetrovsk region and to gain control over the Zaporizhzhia region. To the south of Krasnohorivka, the Russians made a small advance within Yablonivka, encircling the Ukrainian forces to the south of the town. The Russians managed to gain control over the central parts and the eastern section, cutting the remaining parts of the town into northern and southern flank, with the Ukrainian positions now encircled in the forest lines here to the south. The Russians have further secured the operational encirclement from the western parts of the remaining Ukrainian positions here west of Toretsk, as they improve their positions in the area. Getting control over the remaining residential area and the forest patch area, as well as the fortified positions to the north of the town, will allow the Russians to start fighting over the western flank of KUPYANSK, as they also continue developing offensive operations on both the western and northern flanks of the city. The Russian objective was to start storming the cities of Pokrovsk, Krasnohorivka, and Kupiansk at the same time. However, heavy Ukrainian resistance within the town of Chasiv Yar to the northeast of Krasnohorivka significantly delayed the Russian storming of Krasnohorivka. Therefore, the Russians are continuously working on the operational encirclement of Krasnohorivka before they can start storming it like they are doing in the Pokrovsk and Kupiansk directions. In the direction of Siversk and Toretsk, the Russians have made several advances here as well. In the Siversk direction, the Russians gain control over parts of the southern parts of the town as they flank the fortified positions from the rear, at the same time as they storm directly head on the fortified positions of the Ukraine southeast of Serebrenka, looking to gain control over the first patch areas here in the northern section of Siversk, to gain control over the southern parts of the Serebrenki forest area and open up the road to flank the fortified positions of the Ukrainians in the Siversk direction, strengthening the northern flank as they continue offensive operations in the southern flank as well in the direction of Novohrodivka, the south of Novoekonomichne, as they open up the front to storm the Ukrainian positions within Siversk. You need to spread out the front line as a spearhead directly towards the fortified positions. Concentrate your forces, which gives more power. However, the Ukrainians can also concentrate their fire in one section, and this led to a withdrawal of the Russian forces away from the town. The Russians stormed Toretsk from the south, gaining a foothold within the southern parts of the town, following an assault through the forest patch area and the Serebrenki forest area. The Russians have over the past few days been storming the fortified positions along the forest area and have now managed to gain a foothold within Toretsk. With their combined assault from the south and from the north, the Russians are putting the Ukrainian positions in a pincer to gain control over the fortified positions east of the town, encircling the Ukrainian forces to gain control over the town itself, which will open up the road for the encirclement of Ukrainian forces within the Serebrenki forest area. Combined assault with the Russian forces to the south of the Serebrenki forest area and cutting it off from the west through capture of Toretsk will allow the Russians to operationally encircle the Ukrainian forces within the Serebrenki forest area and secure the southern flank of Kremenna and place their own soldiers within the forest area for future offensive operations towards Liman from the eastern direction, combined with their assaults in the northern direction. Moving on to the Kupiansk section of the front line, the Russians advance here west of Novohrodivka, flanking Pyshane from the north by fighting over the fortified positions in the northern flank along the main highway. The objective is to cut off the supply lines for the Ukrainian forces counterattacking in the direction of Novohrodivka, and also to establish themselves to the north of the town to gain control of it and continue offensive operations towards Kupiansk itself. It is also to keep the Ukrainian forces in the area as they storm Kupiansk itself. The Russians launched a combined assault from the riverline area to the south of Novohrodivka down towards Kupiansk itself, through Radkivka towards the town of Kupiansk from the northern flank through the main highway, and to the west as well through the forest lines to gain control over the railway area for an additional point into Kupiansk, as well as away from Kupiansk to secure the northern flank, to secure the flank supporting their forces entering into the city. With the northern flank secure, the Russians will be able to focus on storming the town itself. Gaining control over Kupiansk will gain control over the last logistical hub for the Ukrainian forces east of the Oskar River line here in the northern flank. Gaining control over Kupiansk will allow the Russians to push down towards Senkova, gaining control over a much wider area here along the Oskar River line, significantly improving the logistical situation for the Russian forces in the western bank of the Oskar River line, also freeing up a lot of Russian forces currently pinned down due to Ukrainian fortified positions being multi-layered here on the eastern bank of the Oskar River line, and the Russians' lack of a logistical hub to supply such a large amount of forces necessary to capture this area. The Russians are able to gain control over Kupiansk. They'll have an additional supply hub, a logistical hub for their forces in the Kupiansk Kharkiv direction. This will allow the Russians to step up offensive operations on the western bank of the Oskar River line east of Kharkiv for future offensive operations towards Izium and Liman, significantly improving the Russian positions in the area. This is why this is the first stage of the Russian summer offensive. Storming Pokrovsk and Kupiansk will significantly improve the logistics of the Russian forces for the second stage, which will be centered around the Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia directions, where the first stage is focused mainly on the Donetsk region and improving the positions, enabling the second stage. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.